His Excellency Victor Hugo Morales Melendez, Ambassador for the United Mexican States to Trinidad and Tobago, Campus Principal, Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, Deputy Campus Principal, Professor Derek Chady, Faculty Deans, Heads of Departments of the UWI St. Augustine Campus, Professor Bheshem Ramlal, our featured speaker and Professor of Geospatial Information Engineering, staff and students of the UWI St. Augustine Campus, friends and family of Professor Ramlal, our specially invited guests, members of the media. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Professor Shirin Hack, Chair of the Open Lectures Committee here at the UWI St. Augustine, and for this evening's session by Professor of Geospatial Engineering, Professor Bheshem Ramlal. We are extremely pleased and excited to host you this evening. A major role of the universities has been the creation of new knowledge via research to move nations and humanity forward. And in this scenario, the role of the Open Lectures Committee is to host professorial inaugural lectures to showcase the research and work of the campus's recently appointed or promoted professors. These folks have truly excelled in their intellectual mandate. Furthermore, the role of this committee is also to advance the university's knowledge transfer agenda via high-quality open lectures by exceptional local, regional, and international speakers. And Nobel laureates and heads of states have graced these stages in the past. Today's lecture, especially, will show you the relevance of our best minds at the university tackling the problems of importance to us in this region. These lectures are therefore just one of the platforms that our campus uses to engage the wider national community on issues relevant to local and regional development, impact regional policymaking, analysis, and evaluation, stimulate and encourage the pursuit of excellence. So be sure to follow the UWI St. Augustine Facebook page, where you will see information on upcoming events. At this point, I would like to invite Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, Campus Principal, St. Augustine Campus, to deliver opening remarks. Let us welcome her to the stage.
Excellency, Ambassador Melendez, I think you're now one of us. You're here so often to celebrate with us, and I know this is your second engagement for the day with us. So wonderful to have you. Our special guest, or are you the host, Dean Ramlal? I'm not too sure which one you are. But in any event, special welcome to you. In this of your inaugural lecture, to my Deputy Principal, Professor Derek Chady, to all of the wonderful UWI colleagues who are here today, and of course the family and special guests of Dean Ramlal, and all the friends, staff, and students of the campus. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. As was explained to you, this is a special event for us, and I'm really very pleased to welcome you to the inaugural professorial lecture by our esteemed Professor Bheshem Ramlal, who is also our Dean of the Faculty of Engineering. He was awarded the title of Professor in 2023. So it has taken us a little bit of time to get to the inaugural lecture. But of course, you know, we keep our deans very, very busy. So I'm sure that's the reason. But it remains a significant milestone in the academic career at the University of the West Indies. And I just, in fact, came from the Faculty of Engineering. I visited the faculty board meeting this evening, so I am aware too of all the wonderful work that the Faculty of Engineering is doing, one of our flagship faculties actually, with Dean Ramlal at the helm. Of course, Professor Ramlal frequently remarks that he comes from a unique engineering discipline, and we can understand why, as many felt geomatics did not belong with the rest of engineering. And I'm sure we will see by the end of this lecture that indeed it doesn't just belong, but it is very much centered on development and very much centered on academic excellence. It has far-reaching implications for us in the Caribbean, particularly in relation to our sustainable development goals. Professor Ramlal's work has had a significant impact on society, particularly in the areas of geospatial technology, sustainable development, and infrastructure planning. He supported the design and review of academic programs in geoinformatics and geomatics engineering at the UE, training hundreds of professionals, I should say hundreds of varied professionals, because we were just chatting and he was boasting. I see different students coming in from various ministries and walks of life, agriculture, even the Electoral and Boundaries Commission. That's where his students are placed because it's such an interesting and varied discipline. He supported also and was very instrumental in capacity building, ensuring the region has a pool of geographic information system experts to serve the needs of the Caribbean. His work encompasses crucial areas such as flood risk management, sea level rise, and climate mapping, all of which have played a significant role in shaping climate change adaptation policies and contributing toward the overall policy position of leaving no one behind and no community behind. Of course, this is a goal and a policy that the campus endorses. By developing innovative tools and participatory GIS models, he has supported community-based planning, a vital resource for small island developing states such as ours that are particularly vulnerable to natural disasters. Also, Professor Ramlal has advised governments and international agencies on data governance, spatial policy, and its importance to sustainability, while contributing to the Caribbean's geospatial transformation by advocating for open data and the sharing of spatial information. And I know this is quite a mouthful, all of the things that I've said. Many of you probably, like myself, have no idea what it means, but by the end of this lecture, we'll all be very well educated, I'm quite sure. As you can see, his work has direct ties to sustainable development for the country and the region, and that much we understand and appreciate, although we may not be familiar with some of the nitty-gritties of the subject. And in fact, it's one of the ways that we demonstrate and continue to demonstrate that the University of the West Indies is the world's leading university in sustainable development goals, and also one of the leaders in terms of climate change generally. We did not say that. It was the United Nations that said that. So the Professor Ramlal's research is crucial to our work in the SDGs, because we know that in order to measure the 169 targets, we need current and reliable data. His work in geomatics is critical here because, as he will elaborate on further, 90% of all of the data needed to achieve the SDGs is geospatial in nature. This argument enabled us to secure funding for a project to help improve the national geospatial ecosystems in the Caribbean in partnership with the government of Mexico. And this is why our dear friend and ambassador is here with us this evening. The United Nations Global Geographic Information Management Americas and the Association of Caribbean States project, resulting in a geospatial observation center that facilitates access to high-value information for the Caribbean in decision-making related to agriculture, the environment, combating climate change, disaster reduction, mining, and many other areas. A key component is the importance of evaluating our national geospatial ecosystems, and this would allow us to pinpoint focal areas such as human capacity development, upgrading our infrastructure, and boosting data collection efforts. And overall, what this project hopes to do is to create effective strategies to ensure our geospatial ecosystems remain sustainable for the future. Actually, in March, a couple months ago, I was at a Future Science Symposium organized by our esteemed chair, Professor Hack, and I was told by one of the participants there that Trinidad and Tobago is perhaps the most ideally placed location in the world, or certainly one of them, geographically, for a space station. Yeah? So, Ambassador, is that going to be our next project? I was quite amazed, and from somebody very authoritative who told us that. As you can see, the topics covered this evening are relevant and crucial to our society. The work indicates that this university is not simply a teaching and learning institution, but so much more. We are at the forefront of innovative global solutions for sustainable development, whether through our work on climate change, food insecurity, or economic stagnation. One of the key points, too, in our research agenda and our innovation agenda is the way the work from different faculties and scholars feed into each other, the interdisciplinary nature of all of this excellent work that fuse together. Our research is a testament to the power of education in promoting development. And as you are seeing, we have produced and continue to produce exceptional scholars like Professor Ramlal. They continue to do us proud and showcase the value of our campus. By the way, I am not giving his biography, really, I'm speaking a bit about his work, but I also learned today that he and his faculty are also very much involved in reaching out to the cultural landscape. They have an engineering booth at the Diwali Nagar. I didn't know that until today. So lots of things happening with our professor. So I invite you to give him your full attention as he will take us through his treatise on the need for functional national ecosystems in supporting access to geospatial information for decision-making, policy formulation, and administration, especially in relation to the SDGs. And before I close, allow me to say a word of thank you to our very dynamic and brilliant chair, Professor Hack, who is, of course, a professor of astronomy, and her very hard-working team. There's a lot goes into this effort for all of their excellent work in organizing this flagship event on our behalf. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Antoine, for those wonderful, enlightening words. I will now like to invite Dr. Cherise Griffith-Charles, Head of the Department of Geomatics Engineering and Land Management, to introduce our speaker. Please welcome her to the stage.
His Excellency Victor Hugo Morales Melendez, Ambassador for the United Mexican States to Trinidad and Tobago, Campus Principal, Professor Rosemary Bell-Antwine, Deputy Campus Principal, Professor Derek Chady, faculty deans, heads of departments of the UE St. Augustine campus, Professor Bheshem Ramlal, our featured speaker and professor of Geospatial Information Engineering, staff, and lots of our students of the UE St. Augustine campus, friends and family of Professor Ramlal, our specially invited guests, members of the media. Good evening. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker today, Professor Bheshem Ramlal, whose extensive academic and professional background truly reflects his outstanding contributions to both tertiary education and the field of spatial information systems. But before I mention some of his wide-ranging qualifications, I would like you to know that I have known Bheshem since 1985, when he was first entered UE and the Department of Land Surveying, as it was then called, which is now the Department of Geomatics Engineering and Land Management, which I now head. I was already in my final year, as I was in the very first cohort of the department when it was established in 1983. So please stop counting how long ago that was. But since then, Bheshem has not left UE, except for furthering his studies abroad and some brief stints. So he has dedicated his boundless energies to academia and to the University of the West Indies, and we're glad of it. And truly indefatigable he is, since we often call him Speedy Gonzales. Sometimes that's in recognition of the fact that when emails are sent out, he responds almost before you press the send button. But his was not a singular focus on rising to the academic pinnacle of professorship as he did. He began with teaching assistant lecturer to senior lecturer. But in all those years, he has also devoted himself to supporting the UE and its many offices and administrative positions that it takes to manage this behemoth of an institution. He's therefore held several administrative positions, from head of department to now dean of the faculty, and external to the faculty as campus mentor, member of the board for undergraduate studies, campus procurement committee, member of University Library Assessment Committee, campus council, and that's just to name a few. There are myriad others. He still somehow had even more energy to get involved in community and professional activities outside of UE, such as more than 50 consultancies, more than 40 training courses, almost 20 professional memberships, and even assisted in managing a steel band, and that's the cultural aspect, his own cultural aspect. The First Citizens Supernova's Steel Orchestra. He's therefore a well-rounded individual, and like the geospatial data he manages and researches exists in many, many dimensions. 3, 4, 5, 6, how many ever. So allow me to mention just some of his qualifications, because they're too numerous to mention. Bheshem holds a PhD in Spatial Information Science and Engineering from the University of Maine in USA, where he was a Fulbright scholar, and where he also met his lovely wife, Kelly, and attained perhaps his most important qualification, that of husband. His academic journey also includes a Master of Science in Map and Geoinformation Production and a postgraduate diploma in Map and Geoinformation, both from the prestigious International Institute for Aerospace Survey and Earth Sciences in the Netherlands, which we in the geospatial industry know as the ITC, and which is now part of the University of Twente. But Bheshem remains humble. He's often spoken of the hardships and also simplicity of his youth, growing up in Deep South and being deeply involved in large-scale agricultural pursuits in cocoa, coffee, and rice. That far removed from his eventual international reach and his interactions with international agencies, as the principal mentioned, UNDP and JEF, SGGF, and the governments of Mexico, Chile, and the UK. He also speaks of his early rough start to academics and of how he strove to surmount this ascent to excellence. So Bheshem's extensive experience, both in the classroom and in administrative leadership, makes him a unique and inspiring figure in the field of engineering and spatial sciences. We are fortunate to have him share his expertise and insights with us today, and I'm sure he has many more interesting stories to tell of his lifelong interest in geospatial data wrangling and its application, its necessity to understanding spatial data, to understanding everything in the world, to decision-making, and predicting all things tangible and intangible that can be located in space. Over the years, as the discipline added to the traditional terminology of land surveying to reflect its expansion into technology in its reach and usage by adding all the terminology which some of you may not quite understand, as the principal mentioned, geomatics engineering, and geospatial studies. But Bheshem has kept at the forefront of the discipline in all its growing and varied facets. So please, all in all, please join me in welcoming Professor Bheshem Ramlal to speak today on advancing geospatial ecosystems functionality to address Caribbean development challenges.
Thank you very much, Professor Hack, Professor Antoine, and Dr. Griffith Charles. It's really nice that, you know, we have just observed Mother's Day, and one of the things that I'm really grateful for is all the mothers and mothering figures that were part of my journey. My master's degree and PhD supervisors were women as well. So I've benefited quite a lot from those kinds of support. I also want at this time to thank my wife of 28 years who's been there to support me over this long journey. Also, my eldest brother is here and his wife, and they've been, you know, as second parents. I'll give you a little background before I start my session. When I was about 7 years old, my father passed and left my mother with eight kids. The eldest was 13. The youngest was 3 months old. I was number 5 in there. And so when Dr. Charles talks about struggles, it was hard. But because of the amount of togetherness we had, you know, each of us, as we became old enough to work, we contributed to family. And my brother was the first. And so it is because of these people we are able to do well. My mother, you know, taught us that education was the passport to a better life. And so it was important, really, to do well. And one of the things that I always tell, and I see many of you here, many of my former students, and I will mention some of them in a minute, but I always say that one of the things that is really important to always remember, and that should motivate you and keep you grounded, is the sacrifices that have been made by your ancestors, by those people who toiled on the estates. And we are going to observe Indian Arrival Day. And I always remember that we need to make sure we honor and we respect those sacrifices. And that's how we do well. So with that said, I want to thank you all for being here, and I will start my session my lecture in just a minute. And just to point out a few things, and there's a reason why I'm telling you this. I've invited several people. Ambassador is here. Thank you very much, sir. But I've also invited, for example, the Deputy PS of Agriculture. And I'm going to start mentioning some people, and they're all former students. The Deputy PS of Ministry of Health, the Director of Surveys, the Commissioner of State Lands, the GIS Officer at EBC, the GIS Officer at Ministry of Health, the GIS Officer at TNTech, Lieutenant Tiber Briggs, who is from the Coast Guard, and other people like that. And you would ask, well, why are they all in such different areas? And how could they be students from geomatics engineering? And I will explain that as we go along. So with that said, thank you again for being here, and I will get my laptop and not delay you any further. So if you can you switch to my presentation, please? And so I am going to talk about advancing geospatial ecosystems to support Caribbean development challenges. And what I will show you is the importance of geospatial in all that we do. And as campus principal mentioned, more than 90% of human activities require the use of geospatial data. So I will talk a little bit about the general value. I was reflecting earlier that when I joined UWI was 25 years old. UWI is now 65. So I've been here for a pretty long time. And because of that, there are so many things that I could tell you about the work I would have done over the years. But I've chosen to intentionally keep this a little bit general. So it's going to be broad-based, and if you came expecting a lot of depth in terms of nitty-gritty equations, triple integrals, you're not going to get that. What you're going to get is a general treatment of a lot of interesting things that contribute to how we make decisions. So I'm going to provide a brief introduction, a little bit of a definition, and talk a little bit about the value of geospatial information, geospatial ecosystems and the components of geospatial ecosystems, how we assess national geospatial ecosystems readiness. And I will focus a bit on a study that I did, and so you get a sense of how important these things are. Some of the challenges that we found, and we meaning that one of the other things that I've done a lot of is collaborate. And I mentioned earlier to campus principal that I've worked with almost every department on campus, whether it's cultural studies, archaeology, epidemiology, history, you name it. I've worked with a lot of them. So there's a lot of stories that I can tell about all the various things that we would have done over the years. Then some of the work that we have completed in advancing geospatial ecosystems functionality and why that is important, and then I will conclude where I started. So this is a phrase that the United Nations Global Geographic Information Management Committee of Experts coined a few years ago, that everything that happens somewhere. Think about anything, whether it's elections, whether it's running telephone lines. Think in terms of flooding or crime or incidents of COVID, or almost anything you could imagine is located somewhere. And what is important is knowing what is happening, where it is happening, and why it's happening will allow us to formulate contextually relevant solutions to address any challenges that may exist. And that's the essence of what this particular lecture is about. knowing that everything that happens somewhere. So we are talking really about geospatial intelligence and the value that that brings to our society and our endeavors as human beings to make sure we can address particular issues. I want to make sure and couch this in terms of sustainable development. So I have here a definition. I think most of you are familiar with this definition. It is from 1987. Brundtland, in his report on our common future, defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so that's the context in which I'm going to talk a bit about ecosystems and the value, geospatial ecosystems as opposed to regular ecosystems that our Dean of FST would be familiar with from the sciences. So I'm not talking about those kinds of ecosystems, okay? I'm talking about geospatial ones. Now, most of you are also familiar with this particular diagram. It speaks to the SDGs, the 17 SDGs. But we also have, with those SDGs, 169 targets, and we have 234 indicators. In a study I did a few years ago for the UNDP, we looked at the relevance of geospatial information to the 169 targets and the 234. And almost without exception, we need geospatial data to support developing the strategies, implementing those strategies, monitoring and evaluating the results of those strategies to ensure that countries can achieve the SDGs. So that across the board, what we are seeing is that geospatial is key to a lot of what we do. In another study done by the Association of Caribbean States and CARICOM, several specific issues and challenges were identified with respect to development in the Caribbean. These include poverty, and poverty doesn't have to be a lack of financial resources. It could be a lack of other things. So, for example, access to running water, access to other utilities. We have to think in terms of poverty as perhaps lack of access to power supply, and really poverty could be multifaceted, and then how do you identify that? How do you define that in a very nuanced way? And that's where geospatial, locational intelligence become important. Crime, and we know that crime is a big issue, and so on. So we see that in the Caribbean region, there are a few areas that we should pay more attention to. And so part of what I'm going to speak to is what is the value of geospatial in all of this? And some of the work that I would have done over the years, and I'm going to limit this to about 10, 15 years, rather than the full range of things that we would have done over the 37 years that I've been attached to UE as a member of staff. So I want to take it from a general overview of some of the value of geospatial information, and then drill down to some of the things that we would have we accomplished in terms of Caribbean countries and how we address some of those. Yeah, okay, so in terms of big picture, geospatial is very impactful, and it brings a lot of value to the global community. Take, for example, consumer benefits. That users on an annual basis value digital data, digital maps. Most of us are familiar. With your smartphone, you have something called Waze, and you can navigate with it. It helps us to find places easier. We can add a value to that, and that adds up to about $347 billion a year. We could think in terms of travel time. And a lot of us use the technology through our apps, and it reduces our ability, reduces our time to get from point A to point B. And this saves us close to $264 billion a year. We also can save time by utilizing digital technology. So up to 21 billion hours in time saved as a result of using geospatial. So it's not something to sneeze at. We are talking about very significant impacts. But that's just one set of impacts. If we look at business benefits, we can see that the industry generated close to $400 billion in 2016. And we'll see in another figure where that is going as we fast forward to the present. It impacts up to 75% of global GDP. And in terms of transactions, it supports up to US $1 trillion annually in terms of transactions. And you could think in terms of, dealing with ordering pizza and having that pizza delivered to you accurately and in a timely manner. That's geospatial. You may not think about it like that, but that's what it does. I don't know how many of you know what this little device is. It's called an AirTag. And so you can't lose your keys anymore because you know where it is. This is geospatial. And if you think in terms of your car keys, you put your key into the car and the car wouldn't lock. There's a geofence. That's geospatial that allows the car to know where the key is, and therefore you don't lock it in the car. That's geospatial too. And so when you think in terms of the impact of geospatial information and the applications, it's very, very significant. And in fact, another example would be, you lose electricity and you call up TNTech, and TNTech say, yeah, we know the transformer that is supplying you is done. We're going to get it fixed. And I know Mr. Christopher here, who is from TNTech, and he will tell you that that's how they do it now. It's the power of geospatial to support the work that they do. We also have societal benefits in terms of carbon emission reduction. And it is estimated that the reduction is estimated to be 1,686 million metric tons as a result of leveraging geospatial data. We can decrease by 20% the response time so that we can save lives. We can reduce the amount of disasters that the impact of disasters that we encounter, especially in the context of climate change and the extreme weather events, the droughts, the other issues we have with coastal inundation and coastal erosion and so on. So I mentioned this before. Overall, another study suggested that in 2022, the economic impact on the world economy amounted to between 2.2 and 5.4 trillion dollars. And it is estimated to go up in 2030 to between, I can't read it so well, but between 15 and 30 trillion US dollars. So when we think about geospatial, we are looking at a massive impact globally. And just because the Caribbean is small doesn't mean to say that we don't have impact. We'll see the kinds of impact we have with that. I want to switch now to talk about, and this is just the context, and now I want to get into geospatial ecosystems, the area that really could make a difference in terms of how countries can ensure that they manage their development in a coherent way. So just have a little bit of a background. When we started off in GIS, guy here, Tomlinson, Roger Tomlinson, is known as the father of geographic information systems. And in the 60s, Natural Resources Canada decided that they needed a much more effective way to manage its land resources maps. And Tomlinson came up with this computer program that allows us to manage maps, to scan maps, and to create simple databases. And this was done on a desktop computer. Fast forward to about 15 years ago, we started to develop not only systems that worked on desktops, but worked on local area networks, wide area networks, and create what are called enterprise systems. So you could think in terms of TNT-ECHO, you could think in terms of Lands and Surveys Division, creating an enterprise system to support the activities of the entire organization, so that when decisions are made, we are able to do that with the best available information. So for example, we recently had an elections, and the Elections and Boundaries Commission used GIS to decide their constituency boundaries, their polling divisions, and could manage the entire elections using geospatial information as a basis to support a lot of what they did. And those are the kinds of things we see value in. But back then, several years ago, this type of thing where you have data, you have a database, you have software tools that is located on a desktop or on a server, and you process that, and you get the information to support decision making. That could help you only to a certain extent. And so evolving out of that was something we call national spatial data infrastructures. And the reason for NSDI, as it's locally called, as it's normally called rather than the full name, is because what this allows us to do is to connect a lot of different organizations together. So for example, if you take all the government agencies in Trinidad and Tobago and you set up systems for them to connect, to make sure that we collect the appropriate data, the roads and the other things, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And we create what is called metadata. And I'll talk more about that too, so that you know what that is all about. And then you use that to create catalogs of all the data that is available, and you use a communications network to connect everyone. Of course, you need a policy for sharing the data, and you have some legal framework to make sure that people work together and collaborate. And you have standards that supports everything. Then you have a system that a lot of different stakeholders could benefit from. And one of the major benefits of this is that you don't have to collect, different agencies don't have to collect the same data more than once. So if an agency collects data, let's say Lands and Surveys collect roads and building footprints and other things like that, if the Ministry of Health wants to use that to be able to, let's say, collect information and place it on a map, they don't have to collect that themselves. The Ministry of Health would benefit from that. And if the Valuation Division, who is perhaps doing assessment for property taxes, which may not be so popular anymore, but even if they wanted to do that, they can, because they now have the location of every building in the country. They have the location of roads and other things as well, so that they don't have to collect that. They just simply have to use that and create their maps and go out. The Central Statistical Office, whose census is late, they were supposed to do that in 2021. It's 25, they haven't gotten there yet. But the thing is, they can use that to support their enumeration work, to collect information, and that's the basis to support. And so with NSDI, you can do quite a bit more with respect to collaborating. However, these things are evolving, and so we now are talking about geospatial knowledge infrastructure, where rather than just simply having the data discoverable by somebody, you are processing that data and making it into information that is consumable, understandable, and that is context specific, and that supports decision making. You can then take that to knowledge, and that's where we are going with this. And to support this, we have to build what are called geospatial ecosystems. And this diagram is from the United Nations that shows consumers in the middle and a lot of different components that will make sure that we can get that kind of knowledge. However, in order to get there, each country needs to be able to have a functional national geospatial ecosystem. So it's not enough to build this and think it will work. Every country should have a system that supports the activities within the country, and then you can scale that out to all the countries, to the global community. So I have here a definition of what an ecosystem is, and that's the traditional definition. But then, if you think about a geospatial ecosystem, it's one that is focused on the provision of geospatial information to support decision-making, policy formulation, and administration. And when we talk about administration, we talk about run-of-the-mill things. You know, somebody applies for planning approval to build a house. We use geospatial information for that. Or you want to subdivide a piece of land. That's part of your administration processes as well. But the thing is, you also could think in terms of, well, I need to think about a policy because I noticed that a lot of people are building on, developing areas with very steep slopes. And if you start climbing up the hills with development, then you're going to flood the lower watershed. And so let's evaluate what is happening in a watershed and think about what kinds of policies we could put in place to mitigate the potential damage with respect to flooding. We can do that because geospatial will give us the big picture of what is happening in our spaces, and therefore do the necessary policies, enact legislation if that is required. Those are the kinds of things we need to be able to support. And so without having an appropriate and functional geospatial ecosystem, we are not going anywhere anytime soon. And that's the challenge that we are likely to encounter. So I'm going to speak a little bit now about some of the work I did with respect to evaluating national geospatial ecosystems. And when we think about an ecosystem, a geospatial ecosystem, there are several components. And we have here 5 major components and subcomponents. And I'm not going to speak to all of this. I'm going to speak to some of the results that we got from this and some of the work that I would have done over the years to mitigate some of the challenges. So overall, the objective was to analyze geospatial ecosystems of Caribbean countries to assess functionality, to support national development efforts and sustainable development efforts. So, simple study. We developed an assessment rubric. We tested it in Trinidad, and we refined it, and then we selected 14 Caribbean countries, collected data, and compiled and analyzed. Just to show you, we actually got results. I'll show you the table. And I have even more diagrams, but I'm not going to show you any of that. But the point I'm going to make here is that most countries failed miserably, that their systems were not functional, it was not ready. The only country, 2 countries scored reasonably well. The Bahamas, who actually, their policy, they actually had legislation that governed how geospatial systems should work, and Jamaica, who were way ahead with their efforts, and they had support from their prime minister to make sure that this happened. They actually had a permanent secretary who was very, very powerful, happened to be a Trinidadian woman from San Fernando, who went to Jamaica and became the head of the public service in Jamaica and had the ear of the prime minister, who was able to move this ahead very, very quickly. And so every budget speech the prime minister made after that had GIS in it, had maps in it, and it really highlighted a lot of the work that they were doing. So, in a nutshell, this is the results, where we identified the challenges that we have in terms of what we needed to address. So, data poverty means a lack of up-to-date, reliable information. And so, we talk about the Caribbean being data poor. But in addition to that, notwithstanding all the efforts to educate persons in geospatial, in the geospatial discipline, we still have limited human capacity. One of the challenges that we found was that across the region, when you educate somebody enough, they get taken away. They get hired outside their country. They end up in another country who didn't invest in the person's education. And so we lose valuable people because they get a better salary somewhere else. And so that has been a particular challenge in the region. And so often, even when we do capacity building, we get worried because they're taken away. We also have, although we have people with basic geospatial skill sets, we don't have high-level people who can do the geoanalytical analysis or high-level analysis that would be required to support some of the work. A lot of times, the basic tools in software would be used 90% of the time. And the really sophisticated tools, things like GeoAI and some of the very advanced tools that can help you in making good decisions are not used because people don't have the capacity, that high-level capacity, and that's a challenge that we've noticed. We also have a lack of data quality and metadata standards, and I said I'll talk about this, so I'll tell you a little bit more about this. Geospatial data sharing policies. This is by far the most vexing issue in Trinidad and Tobago and in fact a lot of the countries, because I think a lot of you could identify with this. An agency would use their money, go out and collect data, and then when they finish, they said, no, we're not sharing it. I remember working with a particular agency, and they had 2 different divisions, and those divisions couldn't get access to data from a third division because they said, no, we spend our money. Same organization, But they said, no, we're not going to share it because we did the hard work. And so that's the kind of thing that you have, that people operate in silos. And if you want to make progress with a lot of these kinds of things, you have to share. And unfortunately, we are not doing that. And so part of the thing is, how can you encourage people to share? And one of the things I've continued to argue, I remember doing a meeting with the Committee of Permanent Secretaries, Government of Trinidad and Tobago, and I said, as far as I'm concerned, there's one government of Trinidad and Tobago, not 33 at a time. And I said, that's what you need to do. And therefore, if you spend money, you spend it once, not 33 times. They were actually convinced, and they gave some money to actually move it ahead, but then administration changes, and that's the end of that. Anyway, back to this. So some of the work we have done over the years, I want to highlight some of the work we were able to achieve quite a bit. A project that the government of Mexico funded through the Association of Caribbean States in collaboration with the government of Chile was a $4.5 million project that started in 2014 and ended in about 2018. It was a really amazing project. The UE was brought in as a partner to execute much of this. I was head of the Department of Geomatics Engineering and the representative from UE on the project. And so a lot of this work helped the region. Another project is the Geospatial Observation Center and other things that we would have done. So I want to go to some of that. Now, when we talk about geospatial data and data poverty, the United Nations has identified what is called the fundamental data sets. And these are the geospatial data sets, things like roads, addresses, elevation data, satellite imagery, other things like that, a geodetic network, which is a control network where everything is located. I know most of you are familiar with GPS, and GPS is the global positioning system is a referencing system, so you could locate yourself anywhere on the earth. And so that's a reference system that can be used. And so if you don't have a robust reference system, then you aren't able to locate things in space. And so that was something that was really important. So fundamental data sets is what we have to be able to have a functional ecosystem. And if you don't have these, then you're poor. So the Caribbean-Mexico project was really to help with spatial data infrastructure in the region. And it was intended to make sure that all the Caribbean regions were able to come up to a certain level, all of them at a certain level within the region with respect to the American continent. This was really an ambitious project. And part of the project involved making sure that we can build capacity by allowing Caribbean people to participate at the global level and have a voice with respect to how geospatial data and information would be developed globally. So Mexico felt it was important to give the Caribbean a voice. And so this was quite an interesting project. This is the final results of this. In some things we did very well. One thing I would speak to was the capacity building. And the Department of Geomatics Engineering designed and delivered several capacity building courses at UE, St. Augustine, in Cuba, in Mexico as well. And so this was quite an interesting project to help to improve the ecosystems in the region. And Ambassador, I'm proud that you are in the picture. This is Dr. Charles and other colleagues. We are at the Geospatial Observation Center located in the Department of Geomatics Engineering. And this observation center is something special. It is not only for the Caribbean. In fact, we had a meeting last week with persons from Costa Rica to support their effort with their work in improving their access to geospatial data. It's based on a concept called the Open Data Cube. It's the first data cube of its kind anywhere in Latin America and the Caribbean. And government of Mexico donated the funds to pay for this. Thanks, Ambassador. And what is truly remarkable about this project is that, when you have satellite imagery, these are large data sets. You're talking about gigabytes of data. And sometimes you want to do a single image. If you want to process a single image for Trinidad, for example, which is just about 5,000 square kilometers, you'll spend 20 hours. However, with the data center, you could process that same image in 20 seconds. 20 seconds. And that's the kind of thing that this empowers us to do, that we can process quite a lot of information very, very quickly and make it available to any country, in fact, in the world, if necessary, but certainly Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's all given away for free. Not a cent is going to be charged for any of this. That's the beauty of this donation, that it will keep giving, and we are very excited about this. And it's a system to organize data, large amounts of data, over space and over time. So what you can do is what we call spatio-temporal analysis. look at what is changing over space and time. And so we are very excited about this. This is one of our ongoing ones. This is another very interesting project we did. And I thank Dr. Edwards, who led this particular project with support from me and other colleagues. And I see some of the people who worked on this project here. And what we did was, we were missing road data sets and building footprints. And one of the things government agencies in Trinidad and Tobago didn't have was the resources to do this. We were able to work with several government agencies and got 54 volunteers. This entire project allowed us to get a building footprint data set for the whole country, like almost 500,000 building footprints. And all it cost us, well, people's time from the agencies, but it cost us about 5 pizzas and a few liters of soft drinks. That's how you get things done. And that's not a joke. It literally only cost us a few $100s to get this done with 54 volunteers who supported this development. And this is a practice that we are proud of in terms of collaborative data collection, but a very specific crowd to support the work that we do. Another interesting project we did, and this is the first of its kind. This was done in 2013. I see a couple of our former students who participated in this project. It's called a participatory three-dimensional modeling, and this was done for Tobago 2013, 2014. First of its kind anywhere in the Caribbean region, very successful. What you're seeing on the right-hand side is a model. This is a cardboard model of Tobago. It's 10 feet by 16 feet, to translate 3 meters by 5 meters. And the lines you're seeing there, that's string. And what this allowed us to do is to get 108 volunteers from Tobago, fisher folk, persons who work in farming, cocoa farming especially, as well as in the tourism sector, to populate that map with information, traditional information, that allow them to understand how things were changing and how climate change and sea level rise, sea level change will impact their livelihoods. And therefore, what kinds of mitigation measures they can take to continue to support and sustain their livelihoods. When we finished, we were able to take photographs and then create digital maps that we handed to the Division of Environment in Tobago to continue to use. The model still is located in Tobago. I think it's a depot in Tobago, and it's used for various purposes. These are the kinds of impactful things that you could do to improve people's lives. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the new things that we're doing. Using drone technology, we are able to use laser ranging. It's called LiDAR. And this is part of the campus. This is another view of it. And this is a point cloud. This allows us to measure, for example, the dimension of a building to a few centimeters. Any building on the campus, any building for any area that you want. Those are the kinds of things we do. Here's another interesting one. Part of the research we are doing is on what is called digital twins. And this here is an example of a digital twin we were doing for campus. Here's a better view. And this is the main library. You can see, of course, you can see the roof, and some of them need some work, but notwithstanding that, you can see how this could become useful. What I'm not able to show you here because I don't have the animation is that you can rotate this, and at every angle you see, it's not a two-dimensional oblique photograph. It's a real three-dimensional twin of everything on the campus, and you could rotate that and make measurements and look at the facades of the building and do evaluations in terms of your windows and other types of things on the building if you wanted, if you minded. And there are other things, other applications of this. Other work that we have done, And I see the FAO representative here, Suresh. We did a project funded by the FAO for the Ministry of Planning. And this, we created a geospatial information portal that allowed the ministry to provide biodiversity information for anyone who is interested, all free of cost, and support the various stakeholder agencies. I'm proud to say that I've been very much involved in capacity building and I see many, many of my former students here who have gone on to do a lot of interesting things. And that was through our various programs. And part of the experience is to actually develop some of these programs. And I was pleased to actually work on developing the Masters in Geoinformatics and the MPhil and PhD documentation for that. In addition, I think Dr. Charles mentioned that I had done over 40. It turns out in the last 20 years, I've done 64 training capacity building courses for persons in Trinidad and Tobago and the region. Other things we have done, the United Nations created something called the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework. It's a strategic pathway with 9 different roadmaps on how to develop geospatial ecosystems. And what we have done, and I'm a member of the academic network, the global network for the UNGGIM, and as part of that work, we have done a lot of capacity building regionally and nationally to support the region in making sure we could improve the geospatial ecosystems. In terms of high-level analytical capacity, one of the things we did through the UNGGM Americas, which is a subgroup for the Americas, is to create something called the Caribbean Geoportal. And it's not only about data, it's about what we call software as a service, where you can go online, register as a user, and then use tools that are available for free on the portal. So you don't even have to buy software. You could run analysis using the portal. And this is something that the UE worked very closely with colleagues from ESRI, which is the software company, and other people to set this up for the Caribbean region. Here's an example of the kind of analytical solutions that we could provide from the Geospatial Observation Center. This was done in quick time. I remember the ambassador asked for a PowerPoint presentation, and within 3 days, we were able to prepare all of this and submit it to them because we needed to demonstrate that this thing actually works. And this here is the Caroni Swamp, and it's a time lapse from 2016 to 2025, processing data and making sure you can see the changes that happened in the swamp for just under a 10-year period. Very, very easy to do very quickly. Here is another one we did. This is what is called the vegetation index. You want to show how vegetation is changing. This is done for 2024 to show the kind of vegetation that exists in Trinidad for a 1-year period and the changes in vegetation cover. Again, very quick time. We set up a group called the Geospatial Information Research and Innovation Group within the faculty. Most of us who are from UE will use the UE map. Yeah, and if you check your phone, there's a UE app, and you go in and you would see a map. That map was done by the Geospatial Department, the GERI group. That's the kind of thing that we continue to do. Just some samples of additional projects. We at present working on a project with NAMDEVCO to do crop yield estimation using drones and satellite imagery. We can also do things like that. Flood modeling and analysis, erosion analysis. One of the interesting projects I did, and I see Dr. Fulong here, was to do an optimal route analysis. I remember, and I had support from other students. During the big question about the highway reroute, it was Dr. Kublal Singh and other people were saying, you could reroute the highway. And so part of what our mandate was to find out whether the route was actually optimal. And so we ran the analysis using geospatial tools, and this required a high level of analytical skills. And we ran the analysis, and what we demonstrated was the highway route that was proposed was actually close to optimal. And you could do that, so you can support an argument as to why you have made such certain decisions using the technology that you have. And of course, you know, a lot of the crime analysis, and I see Prof. Chady here, and we have done about 25 years of work using geospatial technologies for those kinds of things. Fear of crime was one of the big ones. I want to go on now to talk a little bit about data sharing and disseminating information. What has always been my concern is that we spend a lot of money, and as I said, these are millions and millions of dollars locally in investment. And when we finish, we don't share it. And it means that we have wasted taxpayers' money by doing this and not making it available for use. And so sharing is how you use it many times. You know, the usefulness is something of anything that you produce. It's in its use. And if you don't use it, then it's useless. And therefore, you've wasted your money. And so part of the argument is, how do you share? And what kinds of considerations do you have? And so there are issues of liability, of data privacy, of quality and making sure you have reliability. These are all issues. So there are legal issues and standards issues and other issues that all contribute to whether you can share or not. And that has been a major problem. Another study I did, we looked at what is happening over the Caribbean, across the Caribbean region. And what we found was that most countries had Freedom of Information Act, and they had privacy and data protection, they had e-commerce, and they had copyright legislation. But when it came to geospatial data policies, except for the Bahamas that had legislation, nobody, well, they had a couple drafts, but nothing serious in terms of how you share and how you benefit taxpayers from their investment. And one of those big issues has to do with what we call metadata. Now, what is metadata and why is it important? You know, we all go to the grocery, at least most of us do, to buy various kinds of products. And when you want to find out how much cholesterol or how much fat you have in a particular product, you look at the labeling. And you expect that the product will have truth in the labeling. That's your metadata for that product. So with that metadata, you can decide whether it is fit for your particular purpose. Now, if you get data sets without metadata, how do you know whether you could trust it? And that's the thing. We did a survey across the Caribbean region. You know how much metadata documentation we had for Trinidad? Anyone wants to hazard a guess? 0. We didn't have any documentation for data. It's like going into the library and not having an indexing system. It doesn't help you. We talk about data curation. It's like how we curated a museum. It's a big thing. It's an important thing. I know my time must be almost up already, but I will just wrap up in a few. The other thing has to do with weak institutional structures. This is something the strategic pathway people have provided guidance on, but I want to focus on some work that I did, that I led in 2014, thanks to Dr. Tiwari, who was minister at the time. And we decided that what we were going to do is to provide institutional structure to coordinate the efforts of all geospatial projects in Trinidad and Tobago. And we created something called the NSDI Council, and this is the organizational structure that we created. And for each of these, We provided the job description. We had the particular salaries they were supposed to get and everything else, and 28 persons across and that is what is important. I remember taking this to a meeting of the UN, and we have something, an organization out of the US called the OpenGIS Consortium. And they looked at the document and they said, listen, we want to be able to share this with all the member countries across the Americas because it's a good practice. And that's the kind of thing that came out of the work. I had a committee, and I know that a couple of our people here were part of that. And that's the kind of thing that you would want to do in terms of structure. We also created, as part of the structure, an architecture, a technical architecture of how this whole thing would work. And believe it or not, we also drafted legislation. But things change. So I want to talk a little bit about going forward as I wrap. We do know that there's a lot of trends with respect to technology. And the big one would be artificial intelligence and advances in computer capacity. And we see that now, with your cell phone, it's very easy to be tracked and for people to know exactly when you check into Movie Town, on social media, everyone knows that you're there. And so they could go ransack your house, right? And that's the kind of thing we need to do. But so it's a double-edged sword. You could tell your friends where you are, but you also tell the bandits where you are as well. And so these are the kinds of things we have to think about as we use geospatial. But I want to close that by saying that as we go forward, we know that we are going to move away from spatial data infrastructure to systems of systems where things are connected, to what we call the geoverse, where AI would be leveraged to be able to get the information that you need and share it with you. It is interesting, though. I read a book by an author named Donald Norman. He was the chair and founding member of the Department of Cognitive Science at UC San Diego. And he wrote this book in 1993 that talks about, the book is about things that make us smart. And he talks about what he termed intelligent agents. The agent will go away and find all the newspaper articles that are relevant to you and bring it for you to read. That is 1993. Think about what developments we've had since then, and the kinds of technologies that are available to us to be able to support our decision making. So I end by this. Everything that happens somewhere. Knowing what is happening, where it's happening, why it's happening, would help us to address our challenges. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bheshem Ramlal, Professor of Geospatial Information Engineering, and certainly we are very much convinced that he is a professor of Geospatial Information Engineering from his lecture. Thank you for your insightful lecture on geospatial ecosystems and how we can use that to address the development of our Caribbean region. We are now open to the question and answer segment. And we do ask you, if you have a question, to please raise your hand and the microphone will come to you. We also ask that in order to facilitate as many questions as possible within this time, that you craft your questions in a short manner. So we now open to our questions. Dean of Medical Sciences.
Thank you, Bheshem. It was a wonderful lecture. I just wanted to ask the secret of how did you manage to get things done with 5 pizzas and 2 liters of Coke?
That was paid out of pocket. One of the things that we have found is often, investing some personal funds make a big difference. And so I continue to do that. I tell people recently I had a major challenge in the faculty, and I said to my staff, solve it, and the cases of beer will come out of my pocket. And so sometimes that is what is required. A little motivation makes a big difference, and that human touch really makes a difference. I hope that answers your question.
There's a question up there.
All right, good
Yes.
afternoon. Lovely presentation, Professor. My question is that with the advent of new technologies like, let's say, augmented reality and virtual reality, I see geospatial information system being the foundation for these technologies to be commonplace. Would you say the department, geomatics, or by extension the university, has any plans to help develop the use of technologies towards the direction of materializing that? Technology?
Excellent question. And only this afternoon we had a faculty board meeting, and I was showing campus principals some of the work, some of the things that we intend to do. And maybe I shouldn't announce it, I shouldn't say it, but certainly we are going to move a lot of the work that we do with respect to AI, for example, and leveraging AI design technologies. We are going to do a lot more of that. It's going to become a lot more prominent. But there are a lot of other things, and maybe I'm putting my hat on as dean, to say that in the Faculty of Engineering, we have quite a few initiatives to ensure that we could do a lot more innovation. We can partner with a lot of the other departments to ensure that our stakeholders benefit from the technology and the tools that will be that is presently available and will become available in the future. I'm proud to say that we have kept abreast of all the latest developments, and we are happy to make sure that we impart the capacity development training to our stakeholders. And when we say stakeholders, it's not only the persons who are coming in. In fact, a big focus right now is on continuous professional education to make sure that persons who would have left already and didn't benefit from exposure to such technology, we are going to make sure that we bring them in and educate them with respect to that. And part of any professional development, I see several professionals here who must do continuous professional development training, and we do quite a bit of that, and that is something that we will continue to do. Thanks for the question.
There's a lady in the same room.
Hi, I have a question, Prof. So you had done the digital twin, like that stuck with me. My question is with the drones, how much time does that take to do? And like, what is the processing power on the computer that you're putting that on?
Good question. We actually ran a sample. This was the first, it was a trial digital twin that we did. We acquired some new drones in the Department of Geomatics Engineering. And we flew, that took about half an hour to fly. We were using software, proprietary software that is on the cloud. And so it took us about 6 or 8 hours to do. Yeah, so it took us longer because it was cloud processing rather than, desktop processing. Not that we don't have the processing power, but because of the particular software we used, it was available to us on the cloud. We had to upload it, process it, and then download. But these are the kinds of things sometimes you don't have a choice with, you just use what you have. But we are going to acquire more equipment and be able to do more as we go along. Yeah. In fact, I already asked Ambassador about permission to buy some more equipment using some of the funds that he has. Not that I'm putting him on a spot, because he knows that I'm going to be asking anyway. So, yeah, go ahead.
So we have another one here, and then one at the back.
Hi, good evening, Professor Ramlal. Excellent presentation. As you had mentioned, integrating AI into these fields of work, which is very exciting, because that's part of my research as well. One of my curiosities when it comes to integrating this into the industry at the low level is, how do you convince practitioners to spend 8 months, a year, 2 years, quantifying all of this qualitative work that they've done before? Because, I mean, it's one thing to say that, we have these KPIs and we can have these benefits, but how do you convince them to say, okay, as opposed to taking scans of data, that they have to plug this into cells so that the data can be machine readable?
I don't quite follow your question. Can you perhaps say it a little differently?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, instead of taking a picture of a landscape and just leaving it there, right? How do you convince a practitioner to not just stop there, but quantifying the data in case there are any height maps or anything that can be digitized? How do you convince them to spend that kind of time to do that?
One of the things you must appreciate is that not everyone would need the same type of product. And, what you have to do is you have to appreciate what the requirements are. And so a big part of what we have done is to be able to assess user requirement. And based on the requirement, then you pitch something to them. Because not every, some people are happy to take a simple photograph with their phone and that's it. They don't need any more than that. But then other people will go and spend $100,000 US to buy a LiDAR platform, because those are the kinds of details they need. So that making sure that you get products that are fit for purpose is important, and really understanding what people need as opposed to what you think they may want makes a big difference.
We have another question at the back.
Hi, Professor Ramlal. Just speaking from a valuation standpoint, right? I know you had a team that were taking measurements of buildings as well. What is your proposal on maybe working with private firms to go about with those as well? Because we have the resources, we have the manpower there as well, and I'm sure we have many others, much like me, who would be willing to collaborate. That's part one. And then also part two is, I know that the jury group would have worked with surveys and mapping division to establish the geospatial portal, which a lot of valuers and other professionals like us use. Yeah. But I know the last set of maps would have been updated maybe 2014. Are there any plans to have that further updated?
Is the director of surveys in the room? Because this is really, maybe when we restart the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, that would be the appropriate place for that in terms of who would be responsible for dealing with that. The UE often would work on projects that will demonstrate good practice to make sure that you can see how we can address particular issues and challenges, rather than there were some of us who do commercial work, but for the most part, the work that I've done is try to demonstrate how to do something, create a roadmap, and then allow private sector and others to take that and run with it. So I see an important, the private sector really will be the ones who will take it and run with it, but it's really for government and for private sector to find ways to work together to achieve what is required to help the various government agencies to achieve their particular objectives. But so it's really for us to help, support, and guide. And so one of the things that I've done over the years is to serve as an advisor to several government agencies with respect to how they can move it ahead, how they can leverage geospatial technologies to achieve their particular mandate.
The gentleman in the middle.
Very impressive, as usual, Professor Ramlal. Now, in several universities internationally, geomatics is a part of civil, the part of aerospace. I'm not advocating that. I remember when land surveying, geomatics just started. It was in an old wooden building for many years and was like the outside child to the faculty. No, I know you are a nice person, you are not aggressive, you're a dean, but you're not aggressive to push away. Have the other departments embraced the need for that interrelationship between what geomatics is about and the other thing? And if not, what do you think should be the approach for that interrelationship?
Well, my own experience, I suspect, is a little bit different. As I said, I've been, out of the 65 years that UE St. Augustine has existed, I've been here for 40. So my experiences and the type of interactions I've had, have always been very cordial and meaningful. I've worked extensively with persons in the Department of Civil Engineering, for example. I've worked with people in electrical and computer engineering. I've done work with other departments. In fact, I mentioned the work I've done with Professor Chady. I've also done work in epidemiology. GIS and geospatial information is like salt, it's in everything. Really, honestly. And so part of the thing is to make sure our colleagues appreciate what we bring in terms of the value that geospatial brings. And over the last 2 years sitting as dean, I've not had anyone say, well, look, what you're doing doesn't have value. No one, maybe they wouldn't insult me in my face, but but certainly in terms of the work in flooding, the work in coastal erosion, the work in transportation planning, and so on, as well as petroleum geosciences, and a lot of the work is connected. A lot of it is connected to geospatial. And yes, we've evolved from land surveying, Dr. Fulong, in fact, I should say, was responsible for making sure APET would register geomatics engineers. Yeah, so that we are now full-fledged members of the Association of Professional Engineers. You see, so I see that as an evolution in thinking and a more full acceptance of what we do and the value we bring to engineering. So thank you for the question.
We have one more, the lady in red.
Yes. Professor Patricia Jagaster, sociologist. I must thank you very, very much for opening my mind and, to inspiring all of us to understand that everything that happens somewhere, and it is your job to define where that somewhere is in an efficient, accurate, and cost-effective manner. That's what you've been trying to tell us. Mm-hmm. Prof, but I'm wondering, right now, sometimes you look on television and you see the satellite going all over the world, and you see, in an hour or two, you see, the entire globe going right around. And as you were talking, I'm asking if there is a possibility for that interface between that spatial data and local and regional data to be able even to map that somewhere. Do we have that technology to integrate both? And if we do, I'm just wondering what kind of capacity we would need to store that data.
You know, maybe I didn't share the message well with respect to the Geospatial Observation Center. Just to step back a little bit and say that the Geospatial Observation Center is intended to download satellite imagery from various satellites, Sentinel, Landsat, other satellites. And that's imagery not just for Trinidad and Tobago, but for the Caribbean and Latin America. And we can get high resolution imagery. In fact, we can integrate drone imagery into that and process those kinds of imagery. You know, I remember doing a project where we were processing a 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer satellite image. And we had 3 sets of images, you know, red, green, and blue. And the processing took 18 hours to do for each of these. And if there was an error, you go back and you set it for another 18 hours. And then to integrate those 3 images, you had to take it from the 3 computers you were running, put it into another one, and then run that for almost 24 hours. That's what 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer. I mentioned that the whole of Trinidad, with several slices, several epochs as we call them, can be processed in under 3 minutes with the technology that we have now because of the sponsorship of the government of Mexico. So that's the tools that we have now at the UE. And the government of Mexico decided to place the data center on our Debe campus because that campus has the most modern data center in the entire university system. That's why we got it. Yeah? And because of that, we are able to process a lot of imagery and to provide that data. And our people will process the data and make it available for free to anybody who is interested. All right, so the technology is there, the ability to do it is very much there. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. We know we can continue these discussions way into the night. However, we will close off the question and answer session now. And we thank those for their thoughtful questions. And again, we thank Professor Bheshem Ramlal, Professor of Geospatial Information Engineering, for his lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's good to see all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Clark, Deputy Dean from Faculty of Science and Technology and research colleague and dear friend of Professor Ramlal. So we are coming to an end of this evening's proceedings, but before we end, some important acknowledgements. Principal Antoine, thank you for taking the time in your very busy schedule to be here and supporting the work of this committee as you always do. We love you. Right? You know that. You can only imagine the busy machinery behind these events to make them happen. For this, we thank Marketing and Communications for all the amazing work Ms. Chanel Glasgow and her team do tirelessly. We thank the Graduate Studies for their administrative support through Mr. Joel Jordan. And none of this could have been possible without the assistance of the good folks of LRC, Campus Security, and Department of Facilities Management. Thank you all. And of course, I saved the best for last, right? The star of this evening, the reason we're all here. We thank Professor Bheshem Ramlal for sharing with us his thoughts, his journey. It was extremely inspiring. I can't fathom how you've been able to do that much work. And I'm only thinking while I'm listening to your presentation, you're doing relativity, right? For those who don't know, my background is physics. It's all about space-time, right? So we should collaborate. So we have seen that he has truly put the Caribbean on the map with the amazing work that he has done. So at this point, I'd like to invite Professor Antoine to make a presentation to Professor Ramlal as a small token for the amazing work that he has done. So, that's coming. So my words of wisdom to you for this evening, borrowing from thought leader Bryant McGill, curiosity is one of the great secrets of happiness. And in the end, it is curiosity that has led to this inspiring evening that brings you here and drives the impactful work of Professor Ramlal, leaving all of us with much food for thought. And in keeping with the food theme, there are some light snacks for you on your way out as you continue the discussions later. And so finally, right, for those of you who have been attending all the sessions while I've been chair, right, you should know what's coming. So finally, in the words of the great Porky Pig, that's all, folks. I bid you good night and safe journey home.